The sun hung low over the Rocky Mountains, bathing Evergreen, Colorado, in a warm, golden glow. Birds chirped in the pines, their song carried on the crisp autumn air, while a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. Down the winding roads of this small mountain town, the morning hum of school buses and distant chatter from neighbors went unnoticed. Evergreen was quiet, picturesque, and seemingly untouched by the chaos of the outside world. But beneath this serene surface, a storm was quietly gathering. Inside Evergreen High School, the hallways buzzed with life. Students moved from class to class, laughter echoing off the lockers. Teachers greeted familiar faces with smiles, and the scent of freshly baked pastries from the cafeteria mingled with the faint aroma of pencil shavings and paper. The school was more than a building. It was the beating heart of the community, a place of safety and connection. Among the students walked 16-year-old Desmond Holly. To his peers, he seemed like any other teenager. Quiet, polite, and largely invisible in the crowd. But over the past months, something had shifted. The easy camaraderie he once shared with friends had evaporated, replaced by withdrawal and a brooding intensity. Teachers noticed he lingered in hallways, staring at walls, lost in thought. Friends whispered that he had been spending too much time online, exploring spaces they couldn't and wouldn't understand. Desmond's digital world was far darker than the hallways of Evergreen High. He had become obsessed with violence, drawn to extremist ideologies that glorified hate and destruction. His fascination with past mass shootings, especially the infamous Columbine High School massacre that had occurred decades earlier in the same county, had grown into a dangerous obsession. In recent weeks, he had posted cryptic images and videos online, praising violence, idolizing past shooters, and engaging with neo-Nazi forums that celebrated chaos and destruction. Around 11:30 a.m., just an hour before the tragedy would unfold, Desmond shared a chilling image on social media, a revolver and a box of ammunition. The caption was cryptic, foreboding, but it went largely unnoticed. Teachers and peers alike dismissed it as a bizarre attempt to shock or provoke, never imagining it was a real warning. By 12:30 p.m., the school was alive with the sounds of lunchtime. In the cafeteria, trays clattered, students joked over pizza and soda, and the faint hum of the ventilation system created a mundane soundtrack. Outside, the playground and sports fields were dotted with students enjoying the last warmth of a September morning. It was a picture-perfect scene, the kind of ordinary day that would soon be shattered. Desmond stepped through the doors, the revolver tucked securely in his backpack. To him, the weapon was more than metal and wood. It was a symbol of power, a key to control he had never possessed before. He moved with quiet determination, his eyes scanning the crowded hallways. In his mind, everything was precise, calculated, a plan that had been months in the making. Then, in an instant, the ordinary became extraordinary in the worst way imaginable. The first gunshot echoed through the hallways. Screams erupted. Students ducked under tables and behind lockers. Teachers shouted for everyone to lock doors and stay silent. Chaos spread like wildfire as Desmond fired at anyone in his path, unaware that each second brought law enforcement closer. Classrooms locked quickly as drills practiced for decades proved their worth. Students huddled together, hearts pounding, whispering prayers under the dim hum of fluorescent lights. Outside, officers arrived in a flash, sirens wailing, their presence both comforting and terrifying. In less than 10 minutes, the nightmare reached its peak. Desmond, cornered and desperate, turned the revolver on himself, ending his life before any more could be harmed. In the aftermath, the hallways were silent again, but the echoes of that day would never leave Evergreen High School. 2 students were critically injured, and a 4th was hurt while fleeing. The peaceful mountain town, once defined by its beauty and safety, now carried the weight of tragedy. Every familiar face, every tree-lined street, every quiet morning would forever be colored by the events of that September afternoon. In the weeks leading up to September 10th, Evergreen High School had experienced a subtle shift in the atmosphere, an almost imperceptible tension that only a few noticed. To most students and staff, everything seemed routine. Yet, Among the quieter corners of classrooms and the secluded online spaces of social media, a storm was quietly brewing, driven by Desmond Holly's growing obsession with violence and extremist ideologies. Teachers began to notice changes in his behavior. Mr. Reynolds, the history teacher who had known Desmond since freshman year, described him as increasingly withdrawn. He wouldn't participate in class discussions, Reynolds recalled. If he spoke, it was short, almost clipped. Sometimes he'd stare at the ceiling or the floor, like he was somewhere else entirely. At first, Reynolds attributed it to adolescence, assuming Desmond was merely absorbed in the challenges of high school. But as days turned into weeks, the pattern deepened. Desmond stopped interacting with peers, skipped lunch periods, and avoided group projects he had once approached with mild enthusiasm. While these signs were visible in the classroom, the digital trail Desmond left online painted a far darker picture. Investigators later found that he had been active in extremist forums and private chat groups that glorified previous school shootings. His postings weren't just idle commentary. They were ritualistic, deliberate, and increasingly sinister. He shared videos praising Columbine, coupled with messages romanticizing notoriety and infamy. Some posts included disturbing hashtags tied to neo-Nazi ideology, anti-Semitic rhetoric, and extremist memes that celebrated violence as a solution to perceived societal injustices. About an hour before the attack, the digital world became his stage. Desmond posted a photograph of a revolver alongside a neatly arranged box of ammunition. In the image, the weapon gleamed under a dim light, a silent declaration of intent. The caption was short, cryptic, almost playful, but the underlying threat was unmistakable. Peers scrolling through their feeds either ignored it or assumed it was a joke, failing to grasp the imminent danger. Investigators would later confirm that this post was a key indicator of his premeditation. Within the school, other warning signs had been subtly unfolding. Students reported noticing Desmond wandering the hallways alone, sometimes peering into classrooms with an unsettling stare. He frequently isolated himself near exits, a behavior staff only partially registered. Counselors noted his increasing detachment during check-ins, though he rarely disclosed troubling thoughts. In hindsight, every small anomaly, the whispered conversations, the obsessive fixation on violent media, the cryptic online posts, formed a mosaic of warning signals that went largely unheeded. The morning of the shooting, tension quietly escalated. Desmond arrived at school with precision, moving through hallways in a way that suggested a plan had been rehearsed in his mind. Teachers noticed his gaze lingering on clusters of students in the cafeteria, but no one could anticipate what would happen next. Students chatting in the hallways passed him by, unaware that the teen before them had already crossed the boundary from thought to action. By lunchtime, the school's rhythm had begun to falter. The cafeteria was crowded, full of students joking and trading bites of food. The usual banter, laughter, and clattering trays masked the undercurrent of danger. Desmond, carrying the revolver concealed beneath his jacket, moved toward the center of the storm. His actions were deliberate. He paused at key junctures, observing exits, estimating response times, and mentally rehearsing the chaos he intended to unleash. Investigators later noted that this level of planning mirrored the meticulous preparation described in posts he had admired from previous mass shooters. Desmond's detachment extended beyond the physical school. Online, he continued to engage in radical communities, posting cryptic messages and images that reflected his fixation on violence. Each post reinforced his identity within these networks, feeding a cycle of validation and obsession that few adults in his life had fully understood. Friends and family later admitted that they had noticed subtle changes: an obsession with firearms, hours spent on isolated websites, and an emerging cynicism toward authority. But the warning signs were never connected in time to prevent the tragedy. Staff members, meanwhile, were unknowingly participating in the final moments before the attack. Teachers conducted routine lessons, janitors swept the hallways, and the cafeteria staff prepared trays. The tension, invisible to most, was mounting silently. It was a convergence of normalcy and menace. Students' laughter mingled with the quiet steps of a boy planning an unspeakable act. Desmond's social media presence that morning showed an eerie duality. Mundane selfies interspersed with imagery glorifying weapons and chaos. He seemed to straddle two worlds, one of ordinary teenage life, the other of a dark, meticulously constructed fantasy that justified violence as a form of expression. Experts reviewing his posts later concluded that this duality was emblematic of how online radicalization can distort perception, enabling an individual to compartmentalize reality and fantasy until action becomes inevitable. By the time the clock struck 12:30 p.m., all the elements had aligned. The signs had been scattered. Online posts, withdrawn behavior, strange obsessions. But the day had otherwise proceeded as normal. In less than a heartbeat, the tension that had been quietly building erupted. Desmond was no longer merely a withdrawn teenager or a collection of warning signs. He became the catalyst for a sudden, horrifying transformation of Evergreen High School from a sanctuary of learning into a scene of terror. Even as law enforcement pieced together the sequence of events, a host of questions lingered over Evergreen, Colorado, like a dense fog clinging to the mountains. The town, tight-knit and accustomed to safety, now grappled with a collective sense of disbelief. How had Desmond Holly, a seemingly ordinary teenager, been able to plan and execute such a devastating attack without anyone intervening? Could the tragedy have been prevented if the warning signs had been recognized earlier? Parents and community members scoured the weeks and months leading up to September 10th for clues. Some pointed to the cryptic social media posts, including the hour-old photo of the revolver and ammunition. Others recalled subtle behavioral changes: withdrawal from friends, fascination with firearms, and obsessive online activity. To many, these indicators were painfully clear in hindsight, but at the time they were dismissed as the quirks of an introverted teenager. School staff wrestled with their own sense of responsibility. Counselors and teachers repeatedly asked themselves whether they could have intervened sooner. Could a conversation, a referral, or a mental health evaluation have altered the trajectory? The reality, experts noted, was complicated. Desmond's outward appearance at school remained mostly normal. His online life, the space where his radicalization accelerated, was largely hidden from adults. It was a stark reminder of how the digital world can conceal real threats, creating blind spots even in attentive communities. Law enforcement and psychologists began analyzing the mechanisms of online radicalization that had shaped Desmond's worldview. Experts highlighted the echo chambers of extremist forums, where shared ideology validated violent fantasies and desensitized vulnerable teens to the consequences of action. Desmond's fascination with Columbine, coupled with engagement in neo-Nazi and anti-Semitic communities, had fostered a sense of purpose that overrode his understanding of morality. In these spaces, he was not merely consuming content, he was being indoctrinated. Beyond the personal trajectory of the shooter, the community wrestled with broader questions about school safety and preparedness. Evergreen High had practiced lockdown drills, but could additional measures have prevented the attack entirely? Parents and officials debated the merits of metal detectors, armed security personnel, and surveillance systems. Some argued that increased security might create a prison-like environment, potentially harming the educational experience and student well-being. Others countered that such measures were now an unavoidable necessity, a shield against threats that could emerge without warning. The tragedy also sparked discussions about mental health support for teenagers. Experts emphasized that early intervention is critical, recognizing withdrawal, violent fantasies, or obsessive behaviors as warning signs can enable timely counseling or monitoring. Desmond's case illustrated the complexity of distinguishing between typical adolescent angst and dangerous radicalization. It highlighted the importance of a multi-layered approach, combining school vigilance, parental engagement, and digital literacy to detect emerging risks. Community forums and town hall meetings became charged with emotion and tension. Parents demanded accountability. Officials reassured the public while acknowledging systemic gaps. Some questioned whether the proliferation of extremist content online had made acts like this inevitable. Others pointed to societal pressures, alienation, and the allure of notoriety for adolescence as contributing factors. Evergreen found itself confronting uncomfortable truths about the vulnerabilities of youth in the digital age. conflicting theories also emerged. Some speculated that Desmond might have acted in response to personal grievances or bullying, though investigations found no evidence of direct provocation. Others wondered if he had external accomplices or mentors who influenced his ideology. While authorities ruled him a lone actor, the community's search for meaning and understanding continued. It became clear that while the immediate events were documented, the psychological and societal ripple effects would persist indefinitely. The attack exposed an unsettling reality. Prevention is never straightforward. Warning signs, no matter how apparent in hindsight, may not be actionable in real time. Adolescents' behaviors are often enigmatic, and the border between normal developmental challenges and dangerous radicalization is porous. Evergreen's tragedy illustrated the difficulty of assessing risk in an era where online influence can outpace adult supervision and intervention. Even as families grieved, the town faced the challenge of moving forward. Discussions about digital monitoring, school security policies, and mental health awareness became intertwined with mourning. Evergreen High, once simply a symbol of community pride, became a locus for reflection on broader societal vulnerabilities. The mystery surrounding the what-ifs, the moments, decisions, and missed interventions, remained as haunting as the event itself. In essence, the mystery was twofold: the unanswered questions about Desmond Holly's path to violence, and the broader implications for communities across the country. How could a tight-knit town, a well-run school, and a supportive environment fail to intercept such a threat? And more importantly, how could Evergreen, and other communities like it, learn from this tragedy to prevent future incidents? These questions would not be easily answered, and they lingered in the hearts and minds of students, parents, and officials alike, casting a long shadow over the town's recovery. By the evening of September 10, 2025, the small mountain town of Evergreen, Colorado, had transformed from a place of tranquility into a community grappling with grief, shock, and unanswered questions. News spread quickly. Desmond Holly, the 16-year-old responsible for the attack, had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. 2 students were critically injured, and a 4th sustained minor injuries while fleeing. For families, friends, and residents, the reality of the day's events was still sinking in, the weight of trauma settling like a shadow over the town. Emergency medical personnel worked tirelessly to stabilize the injured students. Matthew Silverstone, 18, remained in critical condition for several days, requiring multiple surgeries and intensive care. His family, friends, and classmates held vigils and prayers, hoping for a recovery that seemed uncertain. The other student injured inside the school underwent emergency care and later began a long rehabilitation process. Even those who escaped physical harm carried invisible wounds. Post-traumatic stress, nightmares, and heightened anxiety became part of daily life for the students, staff, and first responders. The Evergreen High School administration moved swiftly to address the immediate needs of the school community. Counselors were brought in to support students and teachers alike, conducting group sessions, one-on-one counseling, and crisis interventions. Families were offered resources for mental health support, and neighboring schools collaborated to provide temporary safe spaces for students needing distance from the trauma. Teachers found themselves not only educating but also acting as emotional anchors, helping students navigate shock, fear, and grief. Local and state officials responded publicly, offering condolences and committing to a deeper review of school safety protocols. Governor Jared Polis addressed the media. "Our hearts are with the students, families, and staff of Evergreen High. This tragedy underscores the importance of mental health support, vigilant monitoring of warning signs, and the need to protect our children from the dangers of extremist influence." Law enforcement agencies pledged transparency in their investigation, promising to provide detailed accounts of how the incident unfolded and what could be learned. The community reaction was complex, mixing grief, outrage, and determination. Parents questioned how warning signs were missed and whether Desmond's radicalization could have been identified earlier. Town meetings became forums for debate on school security measures, from lockdown procedures to metal detectors and security personnel. Mental health professionals emphasized the importance of addressing underlying issues, noting that while security measures could protect against immediate threats, Broader strategies were necessary to prevent radicalization before it manifested as violence. Counselors and psychologists worked with students to process not only fear but guilt, anger, and confusion. Survivors of the shooting struggled with survivors' guilt and anxiety over returning to the school environment. Teachers, too, wrestled with complex emotions: relief at the limited casualties, frustration over missed warning signs, and the heavy responsibility of guiding traumatized youth. The town collectively recognized that recovery would be a long, arduous process. Investigators continued to analyze Desmond's radicalization. His online activity painted a clear picture. Weeks, even months, of immersion in violent and extremist content, interactions with like-minded individuals, and meticulous planning for an attack. Law enforcement and psychologists emphasized that the tragedy was a convergence of several factors: personal obsession, exposure to extremist ideology, social isolation, and missed opportunities for intervention. These findings prompted discussions on how schools and families might better monitor and respond to such threats in the future. Memorials were organized across Evergreen. Candlelight vigils lit the evenings, and walls of the school were decorated with messages of hope, remembrance, and unity. Local organizations provided ongoing support to families affected, including counseling services, financial assistance, and community programs aimed at fostering resilience. Evergreen's recovery was gradual, but the shared grief created a renewed sense of solidarity, a determination to honor those impacted by improving awareness, safety, and mental health resources. Beyond the immediate aftermath, the Evergreen High School shooting became a catalyst for broader societal reflection. State and local authorities began examining the influence of online radicalization, social media monitoring, and the psychological pressures facing teenagers. Discussions arose around the need for increased digital literacy, open communication between students and adults, and proactive mental health initiatives. Evergreen's tragedy highlighted that prevention requires both vigilance and compassion, recognizing distress, providing support, and addressing the root causes of extremist fascination before it escalates. In the months following the shooting, Evergreen slowly began to heal. Students returned to classrooms with heightened awareness of safety protocols. Teachers incorporated discussions on resilience and mental health, and the community committed to maintaining open dialogue about trauma and prevention. Evergreen High School, once simply a center for learning, had become a focal point for understanding how tragedy can illuminate vulnerabilities and inspire change. The story of September 10, 2025, ended with profound loss but also with lessons that stretched far beyond the town's borders. It was a cautionary tale about the dangers of isolation, the influence of extremist content, and the need for communities to act decisively when warning signs emerge. Evergreen, Colorado, like countless towns across the nation, learned that vigilance, empathy, and proactive intervention are essential, not only to protect lives but to ensure that no warning sign goes unheeded again. The memory of that day would never fade. Students, families, and teachers carried it with them, a reminder that tragedy can strike even in the most peaceful settings, but also that collective action, awareness, and care can help prevent the next. Evergreen's story became one of sorrow, resilience, and the enduring quest to safeguard the future.